My grandfather's walking through the garden with a scarf. It's officially autumn, you guys. Anyways, welcome back to my channel, and I'm here now with a very requested video. A while ago I asked on my Instagram what you guys would want to see from a YouTube channel, and the overwhelming response has been resources on German folk magic specifically. And I'm here today to give you just that. So you can already see I have all my books stacked up behind me, and I'll pick them out one by one and show you guys why they are valuable for this specific path. I'm going to be dividing these recommendations into two different sections. One section will be on primary resources that might be interesting for German folk magic, and with primary resources I mean written accounts from way back when. And the other part is going to be more secondary resources, which are like more or less modern works of literature written on the topic of German folk magic and related topics that might be interesting. Firstly, I want to start out with the primary resources, and this book is one of the first books that you will find if you research German folk magic. This one comes from Albertus Magnus, which is a 11th or 12th century monk that lived in Cologne, Germany, and kind of wrote down a lot of the common folk practices at the time from all over Germany, I believe. And there's a lot of witchy folklore attached to him as a person, which is also really interesting. And this book that I'm recommending has a really long title. You'll find that a lot in more medieval manuscripts, that these titles can get really, really long. Anyways, in German the title is Bewährte und approbierte sympathetische und natürliche ägyptische Geheimnisse für Menschen, Vieh, Städter und Landleute. It's quite a mouthful, but basically this book was advertised as kind of Egyptian secrets, although this text really has nothing to do with Egypt, and saying that this was somehow Egyptian was maybe to exoticize it and make it a bit more mysterious. Back then people were kind of weird like that. However, these spells in here are all from German folk magic and are a really valuable resource if you are looking into German folk magic for the first time. This book specifically, like the version that I have, is actually quite beginner friendly, because as you can see, the text in here is written in today's regular Latin alphabet, and a lot of the times, as I'm about to show you guys in some other book recommendations, older books on German folk magic are written in Fraktur, which is a old font that was used in Germany and I believe also some Scandinavian countries. That is kind of hard to read if you're not really used to it. Also, if you are going to buy books that are written in Fraktur, they also have different spellings for words, because the language wasn't really standardized back then, and you had a lot more leeway in writing stuff down. So the version of the book that I have here right now is really good in that it kind of fixes a lot of these issues and just gives them to you in regular, modern, standard German, in a text that can be quite easily be understood. However, what I should also maybe warn you about all primary resources on German folk magic is that the people back then kind of categorized things like diseases differently. They kind of had different terminology and words to describe them. For example, a fever or maybe a bee sting could both be described as heat, for example, because both issues would kind of have symptoms that would cause kind of a heating of the body or of a specific region of the body. So the spells in here will maybe just say, this is against heat, and then it's your turn to figure out what that would be in our modern terminology. So this is a really good starting book. I believe there are also English translations of this, and if I find the English translation of this online, I will write it down in the video description for all of the non-German speakers to check out. Okay, here we have another primary resource. This is like the most generic text on historical German folk magic that you will probably find. It is Der lange verborgene Freund, or The Long Lost Friend in its English version. This has heavy ties to the Pennsylvanian Dutch community. And if you don't know what that is, basically a couple of hundred years ago, there was a mass migration out of southwestern Germany specifically into many different regions around the world, but also specifically southern and central Pennsylvania in the United States. And this book kind of comes out of that zeitgeist. The author was Pennsylvanian German, or Pennsylvanian Dutch as they're called in the US. And this book is really big with them, although it is written in German in its original version, and it references places and herbs that grow in Germany. So this is also still valuable for Germans, not just the Pennsylvanian Dutch. Yeah, also the version that I have here right now is basically just a photocopied version of the original text. So that leaves me with the Fraktur font, of course. Things are kind of hard to make out because both issues with the photocopies themselves and the text from which they were copied from, like there are sometimes ink spills on there and stuff like that, which kind of makes it an adventure to read, but it's worth it in my opinion. Like, it takes a bit to get into it, but when you're into it, you're going to be able to understand quite a lot of it pretty quickly, at least in my experience. However, there are also, of course, English translations of it, which are written in a much more understandable font than this original version. Now we have another primary resource, das 6. und 7. Buch von Moses, the 6th and 7th book of Moses. Especially in the first portion of this book, there's a lot of misinterpretation and appropriation of Judaism through a Christian lens. You don't want to do what I did and buy this version, because this version is purely the first part, which centers around ceremonial magic. The entire book is also available online as a PDF for free, which I only found out after the fact. I might be able to also link that down in the description. However, I think that the PDF that I have is also in German. I don't remember if it's in Fraktur or not. I'll link it down below, but there are also English versions of that, and a lot of the times the English versions of like these primary resources are also compiled into like a singular big book stacks. I'll link those down below. And now we'll get into the kind of in-between space between primary resources and secondary resources. For example, anyone interested in German folk magic and German folk belief, I would recommend to everyone that's into that to pick up a copy of Grimm's Märchen, like the fairy tales that were collected by the brothers Grimm. Most of you will probably be familiar with stuff like Hänsel und Gretel or Frau Holle, Snow White, stuff like that. These things are kind of all collected in here, and the fairy tales that are in here are actually from all over Germany, which is pretty interesting. Some of them are even written in Platt, Low Saxon, which I found quite interesting. You might be wondering why I'm recommending these, because these don't have like actual spells written out like in these books. However, you can gain a lot of knowledge about folk belief and folk practices from these books by just reading through the fairy tales and seeing what kind of stuff the people worried about, what kind of associations they had with different plants. Like, for example, there's a story about a juniper tree, and there are a lot of like mythical associations baked into the role that the juniper tree plays in this particular story, and themes like that pop up a lot in here. And what I also will say time and time again, that if you're interested in folk magic, you'll have to get to know the folk that practice that magic, and what better way is there than to read their fairy tales and mythology. So pick up a copy of those. And this is also where we get into other folklore and fairy tales, which are a bit more regional. Like the Brothers Grimm couldn't have possibly written everything on German folklore down in their books. There are a lot more regional fairy tales and folk tales that are quite important to the region that they are a part of, but often get neglected in the grand scheme of things. So I would highly recommend to you, if you are interested in German folk magic, to get very regional and look at the region that you're interested in. Like maybe you have ancestors in that region, maybe you live in that region, or maybe you just threw a dart at a map. I would really get down to a local level and pick up books on local folklore, because that will be even more valuable when looking at the folk practices of that specific region, because each region in Germany kind of has their own thing on folk magic, as I've already mentioned in my other video. So, for example, if you live in Westphalia, for example, I would recommend a book on Westphalian folklore. Even plus points if you maybe find books on folklore in the local minority language or dialect that was spoken in that region. Like, for example, this one. This is in Platt, aka Low Saxon. I don't think this is my specific dialect. Like, this book, for example, compiles folklore from all around Westphalia and surrounding regions. However, those regions all did not speak the same dialect. So this is kind of a mishmash, but still valuable in my opinion. And when you get down to this local level, you will also get to know the people and the culture in that region a bit more. And now we're coming into secondary resources. So again, a lot of regions in Germany, to stay regional for a second, will have books that are specifically on the culture and traditions of that region, and a lot of people have spent the better part of their lives, to be honest, to studying folk magic, folk culture, and generally just folk beliefs of a specific region in Germany. And if you type in maybe Mecklenburg folk culture, Mecklenburg anthropology, Mecklenburg Heimatkunde, you'll probably find some authors that have written extensively on these topics. And you might be able to find their works online or in a local tourist shop or somewhere else. Maybe in a local library or something. Usually these books won't be brand new. Like this one, I think is about 60 or 50 years old. So you might have to get them from an antiquarian. However, these books are really worth it in my opinion. However, you have to be careful, because how old these books are, they might be more or less strongly influenced by nationalism in Germany's case. So if this book talks maybe about traditions in May celebrations, and then on the next page goes over how the German nation is better than everyone else, then you should not be surprised. So also read critically, and don't take everything that these authors say at face value. Now, this book is less regional. It's Magische Heilkunst, or Magical Healing in its English translation. And this was written by Hexe Claire, and she also has a YouTube channel, I think. And she writes more or less extensively on German folk magic in a general sense. Like, she doesn't get down very regional, although she mentions regional differences. And this book is basically a go-to when you're researching German folk magic from a German perspective, not a German-American perspective or anything like that. However, if you buy this book, I really should notify you that in one of her sections, she talks about like spiritual beings to call in while practicing folk magic, and she also mentions a few beings that are part of closed practices. So I would look out for that, and again, read critically and maybe just ignore that part, because I think this book was written in the early 2000s or something, so she wasn't aware enough of the closedness of these practices, but we today can do better. but still a valuable resource in my opinion. Again, if you read critically. Now, if you're going to buy any of the books that I've recommended or going to recommend to you, I would suggest buying this one. Nordic Animism by historian of religion 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨. He's a Danish scholar, I believe. He also has a YouTube channel. I'll link that down below. He focuses mainly on Scandinavia and southern Scandinavia specifically, but he also talks a bit about other Germanic countries like Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands also. And this book is really valuable because he goes into the relation that Germanic paganism and folk magic from Germanic countries have. Like there are some folk spells in here, but most importantly, this book goes into how the people of these regions kind of related to their landscape and the nature that surrounded them and the seasons that they experienced through the perspective of animism and folk magic. And I don't see many people talk about this, especially when it comes to the Germanic side of things. So this is really an invaluable resource. And honestly, again, if you're going to buy anything that I'm going to recommend to you, buy this one. Although it is written by a scholar, it is written like very accessibly and easy to understand, and comes also with a lot of images, and honestly it's just great. However, it is self-published, so you might see one or two typos or stuff like that. You can buy this book only in his shop, I believe, but still it's amazing, and I think more people should read this. Now, I've thought long and hard about if I'm going to recommend this book, and I've went with the decision to do it, but with a lot of caveats. So this is Göttin Holle, or Goddess Holle in its English version. Now, the reason that I'm so hesitant to recommend this to you is that the guy that wrote this is not a scholar, which in of itself is not like a no-go, but he self-published this book, and the way he talks about things isn't very academic or scholarly. Basically, he picks out a lot of different folklore and folk traditions from all over Germany and kind of tries to push his own interpretations onto them without giving the traditions themselves like room to breathe and room to exist on their own. Also, this is like, I think, the third version of this book, and there are still typos in here, and there are still sentences in here that I've had to read like 3 times to know what he was talking about. And I'm just wondering, if you're going to republish this book 3 times with new information, why don't you never go over it and try to correct the mistakes you've made? Weird. 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 However, what I will say though, what is good about this book is that in its English version, it gives access to a lot of folklore and stories on specifically Frau Holle, which is like a German folk deity in the English language that otherwise would not be accessible to people that do not speak German. And also it kind of not just goes into the folklore, but also the folk traditions which are attached to that. And kind of in a similar vein to Nordic Animism, this book also talks about how these beliefs and celebrations kind of change throughout the year and kind of link humans closer to the nature that they live on. However, if you speak German, you can get a lot of these stories, not all, but a lot of these folklore stories that you can find in here in German for free on the website that is also called Göttin Holle. However, I don't think that this is associated with that in any way. Like, I think the authors are different and the name's just the same. However, I will link this website also down below. Mind you, this website can be adjacent to a bit of new agey stuff, so like this book as well. So I would read that critically. However, the folklore in of itself that's like recorded on that website is like basically unchanged from what I could see, and a really great resource to get to know that folklore a bit better. This is an essay on the manuscript of the Indiculus, and the Indiculus is basically a medieval manuscript that was written by monks in order to kind of talk about the Germanic paganism that they found practiced in northern Germany, specifically by the tribe of the Saxons. And they kind of wrote this manuscript in order to warn other missionaries about that and educate other missionaries about the practices that they were going to find while venturing through these lands and trying to convert the people to Christianity. So inadvertently, this book kind of recorded a lot of the pagan beliefs. However, a lot got lost from the original manuscript, so we only have like the chapter titles of said manuscript. So this essay kind of tries to fill a lot of the holes that arise from that, and talk about what each chapter title could refer to in the sense of Germanic paganism. You don't have to buy this essay specifically, although I really recommend it. There's also another website that talks about the Indiculus and its interpretations by scholars in English that I'm also going to link down below for you. And yeah, this also kind of talks about how paganism and Christianity intersected in this early version of folk magic, basically, which is really interesting and really valuable in my opinion. So I think this was the gist of it. I can make more book recommendations in the future and also on other topics, like generally witchy topics. However, this is everything I have for you right now. Again, if you take away anything from this, I would say, think regional, think who was there before Christianity came, think who were the people in this region influenced by, and how could I make the folk magic more current to modern times. Because back then most people worked with what they had. So what do you have? What did the people do with what they had? How did it inspire them, and how could you be inspired in similar ways with the stuff that you have today? So I think this is all I have for you right now, and I'll see you in the next one. 𝔖𝔭𝔬𝔢𝔨𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔶𝔨𝔢𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫𝔨𝔫